It is an honor once again to appear before you on behalf of the Gambia in this most important of cases. I will open a series of presentations specifically addressed to Myanmar's clearance operations. My speech will focus on their preparation, organization, and conduct. You will recall that they proceeded in two waves. The first in October 2016, and the second in August 2017. I will begin with Myanmar's actions that immediately preceded the clearance operations, focusing on the second wave. These included preparatory acts that, among other things, denied the Rohingya access to food and medical care, and subjected them to draconian restrictions on movement, all intended to render the Rohingya vulnerable to the onslaught that the Tatmadaw soon carried out. I will then turn to the clearance operations themselves. I will detail, by reference to the evidence obtained by the UN fact-finding mission, the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar, their objective, organization, scale, and hallmarks. These collectively show, beyond any doubt, that in Rohingya villages across northern Rakhine State, the Tatmadaw and associated forces committed atrocities in the most inhumane manner against the Rohingya, men, women, children, infants, the elderly, the infirm, that can only be understood as having been intended to destroy the group as such. After this overview of the clearance operations, my colleagues' presentations will detail their commission in 7 Rohingya villages located in 3 different townships. The Gambia will then address 2 of the defining aspects of the clearance operations in all these and scores of other locations: Myanmar's extreme brutality and perpetration of sexual violence. Both are well-recognized indicators of genocidal intent. Finally, I will return to conclude the presentations on the clearance operations by addressing another defining characteristic: Myanmar's targeted and intentional killing of Rohingya children. Mr. President, as the UN fact-finding mission determined, the clearance operations did not occur in a vacuum. They were both foreseeable and planned. This organized aspect of the clearance operations, the mission found, is itself an indicator of genocidal intent. That conclusion is firmly grounded in this court's jurisprudence. As it held in Croatia v. Serbia, the scale and allegedly systematic nature of the attacks is irrelevant to determining genocidal intent. Similarly, in Bosnia v. Serbia, genocidal intent was found to be present when the killings were planned, as demonstrated by, among other things, the number and nature of the forces involved, and the invariability of the killing methods applied. As we will see, these indicia are undeniably present here. Indeed, at the time of the clearance operations, the Rohingya were already, as the fact-finding mission put it, in a situation of severe systemic, and institutionalized oppression from birth to death, and their extreme vulnerability was a consequence of state policies and practices implemented by Myanmar over decades. Thus, in the words of the IIMM, the clearance operations were the culmination of decades of systemic persecution and disenfranchisement under which the Rohingya had been stripped of citizenship, excluded from education, denied health care, and marginalized from political participation. Put simply, prior to the clearance operations, the Rohingya were already, as a consequence of state-sponsored oppression, in a state of extreme precariousness. This was by design. And to ensure that the Rohingya were ripe for destruction, in the months preceding the clearance operations, Myanmar implemented a multi-pronged effort to increase their vulnerability to an unprecedented level, even when measured against the deprivations to which Myanmar has subjected them for years. This took the form of mutually reinforcing measures. One such measure was limiting access to food. In July 2017, Myanmar terminated the World Food Programme's authorization to deliver critically needed food assistance. Myanmar does not dispute that it terminated the program's authorization or that of other humanitarian organizations, including Action contre la faim, the largest such organization operating in Rakhine State. In fact, Myanmar admits, to use its words, restrictions were temporarily imposed on the provision of humanitarian aid. The only explanation it offers is that, quote, shortly before August 2017, Myanmar discovered that World Food Programme biscuits had been found at an ARSA camp, which suggested that the UN agency might have supporters of ARSA terrorists among its number. End quote. That quote can be found at paragraph 3.91 of the rejoinder. It is the totality of Myanmar's excuse for terminating food aid to the entire Rohingya population. Mr. President, in July 2017, the World Food Programme reported the results of a food security assessment survey of 450 households in 45 villages in Buthidaung and Mongdao townships. Those are the townships where the Rohingya population exceeded 90% and where the Tatmadaw would soon carry out many of the clearance operations. This is what the program reported to be the situation in regard to food security when Myanmar forbade the delivery of humanitarian aid. During the 30 days prior to the survey, about 1/3 of the households faced extreme food insecurity, such as no food of any kind in the household, 28%, went to bed hungry, 34%, or went the whole day and night without eating, 28%. Nearly 90% of the households were worried about not having enough food, 89%. None of the 82 children from 6 to 23 months old met the requirements for a minimum adequate diet. Only 2.5% reached minimum dietary diversity, and only 8.5% met the minimum meal frequency requirements. Households were employing crisis and emergency type coping strategies, such as begging for food, 29%. The World Food Programme's July 2017 report warned, under these circumstances, and with the upcoming rainy season that may aggravate an already fragile situation, the capacity of the most vulnerable population to access sufficient food in the long term will depend on humanitarian assistance in the near future. Specifically, the program estimated that approximately 38,000 households, corresponding to 225,800 people, are in need of humanitarian assistance. Despite these emergency conditions, Myanmar imposed restrictions that affected all of the agencies that had provided food assistance. This is described in the IIM prepared witness statement of Mr. Andrew Riley, a humanitarian aid worker employed by Action contre la faim in Mogdao from May to August 2017. That is, in the months leading to the clearance operations until his evacuation when they began. He testifies that the termination of food aid occurred only a few weeks before the August 2017 violence. Myanmar restricted the Rohingyas' access to health care as well. Médecins Sans Frontières reported that on August 11, 2017, the organization lost government authorization to carry out medical activities in northern Rakhine State. Together with the food restrictions, this not only made the Rohingya physically more vulnerable, it permitted the Tatmadaw to carry out the clearance operations largely free from outside observation. Again, Myanmar does not deny imposing the restriction in advance of the clearance operations. It does not even pretend that preventing health care was an anti-terrorism measure. It simply asserts that the organization was later able to resume operations. But a year later, the organization remained unable to access northern Rakhine State. Even before imposing the food and medical restrictions, Myanmar undertook to render the Rohingya defenseless, utterly so. Myanmar ordered the removal of fences around Rohingya homes. The fact-finding mission reported that Rohingya villagers in northern Rakhine State were ordered to remove their fences from around their properties. This order, the mission found, was widely implemented in the 3 townships. The mission determined that village administrators charged with enforcing the order were sometimes accompanied by security forces, with soldiers or police removing fences by force. Non-compliance, the Commission reported, often resulted in beatings and fines. The U.S. State Department's randomized survey reported dozens of respondents saying that the authorities had removed fences before the attacks, either by doing so themselves or by forcing Rohingya villagers to do so. Myanmar does not dispute that it imposed this measure. Here is how one witness described to the fact-finding mission the way in which Myanmar implemented the fence removal program. A few months before August 2017, the village chairman, an ethnic Rakhine, accompanied by the military, demanded us to remove the fences from the yards and around the houses. They visited the village together with the police 3 times in 1 month after the order to remove the fences was issued. The witness told the fact-finding mission The villagers who did not implement the order were beaten and had to pay fines to the chairman. The impact was plain for all to see. This is what the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar reported to the Human Rights Council in March 2017 on the basis of her first-hand investigation. One of the more remarkable observations made during the visit to Bongtao was of hanging doors that were standing alone without fencing. This, she explained, made women feel particularly vulnerable and insecure. Why? Because the bathing and toilet facilities were normally enclosed within those fences. The fact-finding mission reported much the same. It found that while Myanmar sought to justify the measure on the basis of supposed security considerations, the removal of the fences greatly limited the ability of Rohingya to keep their homes private. This caused villagers to feel more vulnerable and exposed to intimidation and harassment by security forces and ethnic Rakhine, making it difficult for them to shelter safely in their own homes. Like the Special Rapporteur, the mission highlighted the impact on women, as bathing and toilet facilities were often located within those fences. One young Rohingya woman explained that it was difficult for her to go to the bathroom because now she had to use what she described as open toilets. Summing up, the mission concluded that the effect of the removal of fences, which occurred on the precipice of the clearance operations, was precisely to open up Rohingya households to greater surveillance and to facilitate the movement of security forces into and across Rohingya property. That was not all. To deprive the Rohingya of any modicum of an ability to defend themselves, Myanmar systematically confiscated implements, no matter how innocuous, such as cooking utensils and agricultural tools. There's no dispute this happened. Myanmar admits doing so. Here is what the fact-finding mission determined. Rohingya households across the 3 townships of northern Rakhine State were frequently searched. The authorities confiscated sharp objects, including small knives and other implements used for cooking and harvesting. One witness recounted to the mission that the authorities did not leave a single small tool, not even to clean fish. Another described how soldiers came and took all of our sharp implements and only left the small scissors used for betel nuts. This, the witness said, was all we had to cut food to cook. The confiscation's effect, the mission found, was to deprive Rohingya families of the tools and implements needed to conduct daily activities. These measures were paired with what the mission characterized as strictly enforced curfews. Not only were the Rohingya forbidden from leaving their homes, they were not even allowed to light up their houses after dark. And beyond the curfews, Myanmar imposed movement restrictions. In the words of the mission, in some locations, Rohingya were no longer able to leave their village under any circumstances. A witness from Rothidong Township, for instance, explained, everything changed about 2 months before the violence. Even villages within the same village tract became inaccessible. We were not allowed to go outside the village. Again, there's no dispute that Myanmar imposed these restrictions, although it claims they were anti-terrorism measures. Remarkably, Myanmar cites Amnesty International for that contention. However, the title of Amnesty's report, Caged Without a Roof, Apartheid in Myanmar's Rakhine State, tells you what you need to know about the measure's legitimacy. More specifically, Amnesty's report, among other things, refutes Myanmar's attempt to argue that the curfews were not targeted against the Rohingya. Myanmar found, based on interviews and other credible sources, that the curfews were imposed selectively against Muslims. The bottom line, Mr. President, is that in the months preceding the clearance operations, Myanmar engaged in a concerted, multifaceted effort to prepare the ground for them. This brings me to the clearance operations themselves. As I mentioned, I will focus on the second wave, although these were similar in nature to the first. The fact-finding mission concluded that Myanmar planned and ordered them well in advance of 25 August 2017, when the wave began. In the weeks beforehand, Myanmar massively increased its military presence in northern Rakhine State. On the 10th of August, Tatmadaw airlifted to Rakhine State at least 1,600 soldiers from the 33rd and 99th Light Infantry Divisions. These deployments of specialized, highly trained units required the orders of the Army's Commander-in-Chief. The Tatmadaw also deployed to Rakhine State other units. The fact-finding mission determined that as many as 9 battalions from other Western Region Command units and 1 armored brigade consisting of 60 tanks and armored personnel carriers were moved there. The Tatmadaw pre-positioned its forces in close proximity to Rohingya villages, where it established new military bases and command centers. They occupied public buildings, such as schools, mosques, and monasteries. The Tatmadaw also established camps on riverbanks and other strategic locations near Rohingya villages. Its deployments included the delivery of heavy vehicles and weaponry, including 8 Mi-17 helicopters and 5 naval vessels offshore. The fact-finding mission found that Myanmar, in parallel, recruited, armed, and trained ethnic Rakhine as part of a new regional police subordinate to the Tatmadaw. The upshot, Mr. President, is that these forces, pre-positioned, allowed the Tatmadaw to be poised to carry out the clearance operations with maximum impact on the Rohingya as a group. I turn now to the organization of the Tatmadaw and other security services that perpetrated the mass killing of Rohingya during those soon-to-be-launched clearance operations. Here, the parties are largely in agreement as to the relevant facts. There is no dispute regarding the paramount place the Tatmadaw holds in Myanmar's constitutional system. The Tatmadaw's rigid hierarchy is illustrated on your screens. At the pinnacle of the Commander-in-Chief, as noted yesterday, for the last decade and a half, this has been Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, who was responsible for all material aspects of the planning and conduct of the clearance operations. General Hlaing's orders and instructions were given to and carried out by the Tatmadaw's Army, Navy, and Air Force, each headed by its own service-level Commander-in-Chief. The Army's Commander-in-Chief also served as the Tatmadaw's overall Deputy Commander-in-Chief, subordinate only to General Hlaing. During the clearance operations, this was General So Huynh. Subordinate to the Army's Commander-in-Chief were the Bureaus of Special Operations, responsible for specific geographical areas, where authority was exercised by a regional military command. In northern Rakhine State, that authority was exercised by the Bureau of Special Operations 3 and the Western Regional Command. And falling under that command were combat units known as Military Operational Commands, or MOCs, each comprised of infantry battalions. At the time of the clearance operations, the Western Regional Command included 3 MOCs, augmented by 2 light infantry divisions, the 33rd and the 99th. These were deployed to northern Rakhine State at the order of General So Win, as I mentioned earlier. In short, Mr. President, there can be no serious dispute that the tactics and operational decisions made by the Tatmadaw during the clearance operations reflect the commands and orders passed down through its command structure. These emanated from the very top. I turn now to the conduct of the clearance operations. You will hear more about this in the presentations that follow. I will confine myself to describing the conclusions reached by the UN fact-finding mission and other investigations about their essential characteristics, focusing on aspects that demonstrate the Tatmadaw's planning and organization. However, before doing so, I will say a few words about their objective. That the clearance operations were intended to destroy the Rohingya as a group is readily apparent, not just from the massive scale and extraordinary violence that Myanmar inflicted on the Rohingya, features that will be addressed in detail by my colleagues, but also from the words of the Tatmadaw itself, including, most tellingly, its senior-most leadership. Mr. Suleiman reviewed some of General Holang's statements and the Tatmadaw's surreptitiously disseminated Facebook posts that mirrored them through the lens of hate speech. As these were contemporaneous with the clearance operations, they also cast a revealing light on the intention behind them, an intention to destroy the Rohingya as a group. And that is precisely what occurred next. This is how the fact-finding mission described the clearance operations. Rohingya-populated areas across the 3 townships of northern Rakhine State were deliberately destroyed in a targeted manner. This, the mission found, had a devastating impact on the Rohingya civilian population, which was targeted, brutalized, and terrorized. The mission determined that the clearance operations generally followed a distinct modus operandi. Rohingya villages were approached without warning, usually from more than one direction, and often in the early morning, by armed Tatmadaw soldiers, who were often accompanied by other armed security forces and frequently by ethnic Rakhine civilians. They shot assault rifles towards the Rohingya villages from a distance, not targeting any particular military objective or making any distinction between ARSA fighters and civilians. The mission found that men, women, and children were all shot at. Many victims referred to the volume of gunfire, with some describing it as raining bullets. Many were shot and killed or injured while attempting to flee. Indeed, the fact-finding mission found that targeted killings occurred as Tatmadaw soldiers and other security forces systematically moved from house to house, pulling people out of their homes and executing them, or shooting them inside their houses, or as they left their houses, often in front of family members. In carrying out these targeted killings, the Tatmadaw often separated the Rohingya by gender. Men and boys were then killed, often in mass executions. One former Tatmadaw soldier described how he and his fellow soldiers were ordered to shoot and clear the villages. This involved surrounding the villages according to race. In other words, targeting only Rohingya villages and not those of other ethnicities, and searching houses one after one. Then, he explained, when the villagers were running away, we followed and shot them. For those arrested alive, we tied them with ropes and tortured them. We kicked them. We tortured them by beating with rifles and helmets and punching with fists. We also killed them. The fact-finding mission found that the Tatmadaw specifically targeted educated, wealthy, and influential men who comprised the Rohingya leadership. This, the mission concluded, further demonstrated a deliberate plan or a level of organization evidencing a plan of destruction. Under the jurisprudence of the court, this specific targeting of emblematic members of the group needed for its survival meets the qualitative criteria in determining the intent to destroy part of the group. Here is how a defecting Tatmadaw soldier described the killings his unit was ordered to commit. The unit second in command, he said, ordered us to shoot every target in villages, to go from one village after another, to shoot at every site of a person. The soldier elaborated on what this meant in practice. After we got to the villages, we went after the people and shot them when we saw them. The soldiers' testimonies corroborated by the fact-finding mission, which documented detailed accounts of corroborated mass killings in which hundreds of men, women, and children were killed in targeted attacks. During those attacks, the Tatmadaw shot individual persons, including at point-blank range, and executed people, including those injured, by slitting their throats using long knives. And the testimony is further corroborated by the U.S. State Department's randomized survey of Rohingya refugees, which revealed that 82% of respondents had personally witnessed at least one killing. 1 in 5 had personally witnessed a mass casualty event of killings or injuries, either in their villages or as they fled, with more than 100 victims. Myanmar carried out these atrocities with extreme brutality, a matter that will be addressed by Ms. Ho as a specific indicator of genocidal intent. These acts of exceptional cruelty included beating, stabbing, and burning alive the members of the Rohingya group in villages across northern Rakhine State. And it extended to include the targeted and systematic killing of infants and young children, the elderly and disabled, young girls of childbearing age, and pregnant women. The commonality of these types of atrocities across many different locations indicates they were committed in an organized and directed manner. The mission also found a notable pattern of mass gang rape involving multiple perpetrators and multiple victims in the same incidents, including where up to 40 women and girls were raped or gang raped together. Ms. Pashpinosha will address that evidence as an indicator of genocidal intent. For present purposes, I will simply note the mission's conclusion that the sexual violence followed a pattern. Another feature of the clearance operations, the mission concluded, was the widespread destruction of Rohingya homes and villages, causing further death and injury through burning. Specifically, houses were burned both manually using flammable liquid and matches, and by the use of launchers, weapons firing ammunition that explodes upon impact. One Tatmadaw defector recounted how, when no one was left, we burned the villages. Indeed, the mission verified a pattern of Tatmadaw soldiers intentionally forcing people into houses that were either burning or about to be set alight, and even locking them inside. This included babies and children who were pushed or thrown into burning houses by soldiers. I will revert to the killing of children tomorrow. The burning of Rohingya villages was systematic. Myanmar burned hundreds of them. Based on satellite imagery analysis, the fact-finding mission documented what it described as the widespread, systematic, deliberate, organized, and targeted destruction, mainly through fire, of Rohingya-populated areas. By any measure, this was done on a massive scale. The Operational Satellite Applications Program, of the UN Institute for Training and Research, based on its own satellite imagery analysis, concluded that as of the 18th of October 2018, at least 178 Rohingya villages had been totally destroyed by fire, with an additional 214 partially destroyed. UNISAT analysis demonstrates the intensity of the burning. The image now on your screens illustrates areas of satellite-detected fires using data collected by UNISAT on multiple dates from the 25th of August to the 20th of November 2017. This analysis detected no fewer than 170 active fires in different areas across Wuthidong, Rathidong, and Mogdao townships during this period. And that figure, UNISAT determined, is likely an underestimation, given the presence of cloud cover on the relevant dates. You can see the relative intensity of the fires based on UNISAT's analysis. The darker the color, the more intense the conflagration. Entire swaths of northern Rakhine State are ablaze with dark red. You can now see on your screens the fires in microcosm in the village of Chen Khar Li, a Rohingya village located in Rathidong township. UNISAT explains that it used imagery collected on the 31st of August 2017, just after Myanmar carried out the clearance operation there. The agency compared this image with imagery collected 3 months earlier. UNISAT's analysis identified 671 destroyed structures within the village, finding visible signs of scorching with darkened soils, burning vegetation, and damage to structures consistent with the use of fire. UNISAT concluded almost the entire village appears destroyed. This is depicted in the hundreds of red squares that blanket the village. Each is a destroyed Rohingya home or structure. You can see the burned out remains of some in the inset. Myanmar's planning and organization is also revealed by analysis conducted by the IIMM. It analyzed witness statements collected by the mechanism, photographic and video documentation, land and property records, including those preserved by Rohingya who fled the violence, geospatial imagery and open source material, such as statements by Myanmar officials and corporate executives. And it focused on 7 village tracts in northern Rakhine State that collectively encompassed over 30 individual Rohingya villages. In these areas, the IIMM found a systemic pattern whereby villages and farmland were destroyed and razed between late 2017 and early 2018, and were rapidly supplanted by border guard police battalion bases. The IIMM found that its analysis provides the strongest evidentiary record to date that the 2017 clearance operations combined land seizure, targeted destruction of livelihoods, and forced displacement to erase Rohingya presence from their ancestral homeland. There can be no doubt that destruction on this scale, carried out by different military units across a wide geographic region, had to have been carefully planned and organized. You can see the locations of a sampling of these razed Rohingya villages on the map prepared by the IIMM that is on your screen. Here is what the mechanism determined happened in just a single village tract, Myo Thu Gi, in Mogdao Township, which encompassed 5 Rohingya villages. Prior to the clearance operations, the Rohingya in these villages possessed extensive land, homes, and businesses, substantiated by inheritance, purchase, and formal registration documents. For instance, witnesses described inheriting and acquiring land, possessing houses, shops, and entire market areas, and cultivating large tracts of farmland. Some families trace their possession over generations, with supporting documentation from both Myanmar and even British colonial records. In this village tract, the mechanism determined that prior to the clearance operations, geospatial imagery confirmed the existence of 307 intact structures in one of its villages and another 518 intact structures in an adjacent village. Myanmar obliterated both. In the words of the IIMM, witness accounts, journalist reports, video evidence, geospatial imagery, and internal correspondence from the Rakhine State authorities collected and analyzed by the mechanism all confirm the burning and razing of Rohingya homes, markets, and religious buildings. By early 2018, the IIMM determined Myanmar had cleared over 411 acres of burned Rohingya land with heavy machinery and laborers. The IIMM reported that video footage, photographs, aerial footage, and geospatial imagery show destroyed Rohingya homes and farmland being flattened to make way for the construction. You can see this progression in the series of images that will appear on your screens. First, you can see a satellite image of Myo Thu Gi taken 3 months before the clearance operations. The Rohingyas' homes and other structures are intact. Now consider the next image. This shows the same location 3 weeks after the clearance operation. The Rohingyas' homes and other buildings have been comprehensively destroyed. You can see Myanmar's construction of a military base on the destroyed village in the next two images, taken on the 9th of April 2018 and the 28th of September 2019. Here is the IIMM's conclusion. Cumulatively, this evidence shows the deliberate destruction, razing, and reappropriation of Rohingya land in Myo Thu Gi, leaving its former inhabitants permanently dispossessed and unable to return. To get a sense of the scale on which the destruction occurred, consider the following. Geospatial analysis conducted by UNISAT documented what the IIMM characterized as the extensive and sustained destruction of Rohingya villages in northern Rakhine State, specifically between the 25th of August 2017 and November 2018. 411 settlements across Mongdao, Buthidong, and Ruthidong townships were damaged or destroyed. Further analysis from February to April 2019 revealed continued demolition beyond November 2018 until April 2019, with UNISAT estimating approximately 40,600 destroyed structures. Even that, UNISAT concluded, was likely an undercount by at least 10%. There can be no doubt that Myanmar's widespread destruction of Rohingya villages. The IIMM reported that photographs taken during visits organized by Myanmar authorities for journalists and diplomatic personnel between February and April 2018 further corroborates the systematic erasure of Rohingya villages. Indeed, 95 such aerial photographs show villages razed to the ground, leaving only barren terrain with consistent patterns of bulldozing, parallel tracks, and uniform land leveling. The mechanism made specific findings with respect to the planning and organization of that destruction. It concluded the scale and uniformity of this clearance indicated a coordinated and organized operation aimed not only at destruction, but also at obliterating visible evidence of Rohingya habitation. Indeed, the IIMM reported that the evidence it collected shows that Myanmar security forces and state-contracted companies even deliberately destroyed Rohingya cemeteries, mosques, and other communal landmarks. Mr. President, the carefully planned and organized nature of the clearance operations is further confirmed by the highly specific targeting of the Rohingya group. The fact-finding mission identified that in at least 22 locations analyzed, only specific Rohingya settlements were affected, while other non-Rohingya settlements within the same village tracts remain untouched. Likewise, where the mission established that the clearance operations were carried out in mixed ethnicity villages, satellite imagery showed that only the areas populated by the Rohingya were targeted. That conclusion, the mission reported, was corroborated by witness accounts provided to it. You can see an example on your screens. This is the village of Zaydipien in Arathidong Township. The destroyed Rohingya area is plainly visible. It contrasts sharply with intact surrounding ethnic Rakhine areas. Mr. President, such finely targeted destruction is further evidence that it was organized and planned. The same location and planning is evident in both the widespread scope of the destruction and in the fact that it occurred in locations where Myanmar concedes it did not carry out operations against ARSA. The destruction thus cannot be attributed to damage caused by combat. In that connection, Myanmar included in the counter memorial as figure 8.1, the map you can now see on your screens. This Myanmar represented depicts with red dots the locations where ARSA is alleged to have committed attacks. Now, Myanmar did not include evidentiary support for that assertion. There's thus no basis on which it can be concluded that ARSA actually conducted operations in many of those locations. But for present purposes, it suffices to note that these are the places where Myanmar contends there were ARSA operations. And it's fair to say Myanmar had every incentive to maximize the number of such locations. Myanmar also represented that the locations of Rohingya villages where it did not carry out counterterrorism operations are depicted with green dots. You can now see on your screens a map prepared by UNISAT, which the Gambia included as figure 1.3 in the memorial. This shows the locations of destroyed Rohingya villages based on UNISAT's analysis of satellite imagery. The red dots depict villages that UNISAT determined were more than 90% destroyed. Orange dots identify villages that were more than 50% destroyed. Villages less than 50% destroyed are shown in yellow. You can now see on your screens a map that overlays the dots showing where UNISAT determined Rohingya villages have been destroyed, on top of the dots showing the locations of Rohingya villages where Myanmar accepts it did not carry out anti-terrorism operations. As you can see, a very significant number of such villages, that is, Rohingya villages where operations against ARSA are not even alleged to have been carried out, were nonetheless destroyed during the clearance operations. Here are the numbers. Out of 329 Rohingya villages that Myanmar identifies as places where it carried out, in its own words, no counterterrorism operations, UNISAT determined that no fewer than 122 were completely or mostly destroyed, with another 66 partially destroyed. In short, UNISAT's analysis determined that at least 188 Rohingya villages suffered the fate I have described, where Myanmar does not even try to claim it was acting against ARSA. In other words, Myanmar's widespread destruction of Rohingya villages cannot be attributed to any alleged armed conflict with ARSA. It destroyed these villages regardless of whether there's any alleged ARSA presence. The destruction had nothing to do with ARSA. It was aimed at all of them, all of the Rohingya people. This is compelling evidence that the destruction was planned and organized, and that the intent behind it was genocidal.